Nicole Kupski reporting at Bud Cross's house, who is a World War II veteran. First question, where were you stationed?
in Iceland.
Okay, what were the living conditions like there?
Well, they ate a lot of fish, and that's about all they had.
That's good.
Yeah, but we had good food,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
service, and
Was it
it
really
was,
cold?
it got cold, yeah, very cold sometimes. The wind blow maybe 100 miles an hour and stuff like that, the snow blowing.
Oh,
It covered the
goodness.
huts and everything.
Okay. Um, did the Icelanders help you with anything?
No, no, they
No.
were, we just had our bases there and that was it.
Oh, okay.
See, they didn't care much about it. They didn't like us too much. They
Oh,
had a, they had no
oh,
choice.
jeez. What'd you do there?
We had, our outfit was a maintenance uh, company. It took care of everything that the Army had.
Oh, okay.
So,
Um, was there a problem of like parts? There was
no,
no
no,
problems
no.
like that? Okay, how old were you when you went to Iceland?
24, I guess.
Yes, okay. Were you drafted or
Yeah,
did you not were you
I went that
drafted?
first draft.
Oh, okay. Before you went there, were you like puzzled or confused or what were your feelings when you
No,
first
I
were
wasn't
called?
confused. I knew what was going on, you know. Everybody did.
Okay,
But you have to go, so you just go.
okay. Were you the only one from your family to leave?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Were you ever worried about an attack or anything going on?
Well, we was always on the alert, you know. We
Okay.
had the big Air Force there and a big field, and there was planes coming in all the time and going out. So.
Okay. Were the bases armed then?
Oh yes, very
Mhm.
much.
Okay. Um, you said you ate fish for meals there?
Oh, we had some fish, yeah, and but otherwise we had our regular army food, beef and
Mhm.
mutton or this or that, you know.
Okay. Do you know how many people approximately were on your base? Like a lot?
There was a lot.
A
That's
lot?
about all I can say on that
A
because
lot.
we had a big. It was the biggest airfield I think anywhere, and they used to have flights of about 1,000 bombers come in from the United States, and then they'd land there, and then from there they take off to England and to Germany.
Oh, okay.
And we had all the fighters and had a squadron of P-38s and the 51s came after that.
Say
So
there
we had
was
a
a
lot of
lot.
protection.
Okay. Was there ever a fear of disease or anything during
No, we
your
had shots for everything.
Oh, okay. So
You
you're
know, they gave
protected.
us the needle for about anything that could happen.
Okay. Now about Hitler. Were there rumors going around about him?
Oh, we'd heard rumors and rumors about him all the time. You know, there was always
Oh,
somebody come up with something.
okay.
So
How did you personally feel about him?
didn't like him. That's why
You didn't
we wanted to get him out of there.
Okay. How did you how did they affect Germany through your eyes?
So what do you mean
The German leaders and
the
stuff.
leaders? So the people didn't want half of what went on.
Oh,
You know, it was they were just forced to do what they had. You know,
and finally, how long were you up there?
I was there 3.5 years. Yeah, I never got a furlough. Went into service and come out, and I stayed in completely for a little over 4 years. Yeah. And you know, there was one thing I found out while I was there. Uh, my dad worked at Fallenberg's engine in Two Rivers, And they had all their boats, most of their boats had these Collenberg engines in them.
Oh.
And the guy from there visited here. He wanted to buy a engine for his boat, and my dad saw him. And he talked, and then he talked to me.
Oh.
So I saw somebody anyway.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I have.
Oh, that's it then. Well, that's good.
Ask you questions about World War II. Okay. For the first question, how were you chosen for the war? Were you drafted?
Yes, I was drafted. President Roosevelt sent us a letter and it said, "Greetings, you are invited to join the United States Army."
Okay.
Everybody had a draft card, and then they took numbers. They drafted you by number. They actually took it out of a fishbowl, I guess, as a large fishbowl probably.
Did they tell you if you were in the Air Force or?
No, this is a story all by itself, but when you're drafted, that doesn't specify which branch of the service you're going into. I had preferred, I wanted to get into the Marines, but when you go down to Milwaukee, this is the next step after you go through your draft board. When we got to Milwaukee, then they determined where you would go. I said I'd like to go into the Marines, but that didn't make any difference. That's why they sent me into the Army. So I was actually in the United States Army when I went in, as I was drafted.
Where were you based?
I was sent to St. Petersburg, Florida, which was real nice because it was in February, and it was just like the differences now. It's nice in Florida and it's not nice around here.
Yeah.
So we had it was a real nice, I went to basic training. I shouldn't say nice, but we lived in a hotel. The Army had taken over a lot of hotels in St. Petersburg and in all the other states and cities. And we stayed in the hotel. It wasn't like it is for civilians, but at least we stayed there. And then we took our training down there for, I guess we were there about 8 weeks.
Was it hard training?
Well, it was for most of us because we were all in good shape. I mean, and it's just like the Packers when they come into training camp, they're not in too good a shape either. And we were all young. At that time, of course, I was 19 years old. But we weren't in good physical shape like the Marines or the Army demanded. So we had tough basic training, right?
What year did you have to go? What year was that?
1943.
Where did you go after you were in Florida?
I went to California. We hit all the high spots.
Okay.
just by coincidence. I mean, it wasn't planned that way. But when I got to California, first of all, when I was in the Army, I was attached to the Signal Corps, and this gets a little complicated. But the Army has several different branches, of course, that you could get into, like the artillery or the infantry or whatever. But I was in the radio section, that is in the communications division, and so. When I went out to California, I went to radio school. And from California, they sent me to Salt Lake City. And this was all a bunch of schools that you'd go to. Most of it was Morse code, and there was a lot of it, of course, was verbal. But those were all radio schools. I went from, I've forgotten what the name of the city was actually in California. But anyhow, from California, I went to Salt Lake City, Utah. And there I completed my radio school training. And from Salt Lake City, at Salt Lake City, I was definitely now in the Signal Corps. I was no longer definitely Army. I could go to the Air Force or I could go anywhere. And then I took a test to the Air Force, and then I was transferred into the Air Force, actually. So I was in the Signal Corps, transferred to the Air Corps. And then from Salt Lake City, we were shipped to, we always called it shipped. Actually, we were transferred. We were sent to a gunnery school out in Wendover, Utah, which is real remote part of the world between the mountains. And of course for gunnery school, this is aerial gunnery school where you actually fly and you learn, you shoot, of course, you shoot regular rifles and all kinds of machine guns and everything, and then gradually they work you into aerial gunnery school where you get into a plane and you fly and you shoot from a plane.
When did you start your actual combat?
D-Day, that's June 6, 1944.
And where did you have to you flew over Germany? Is that what you
Yeah, we were based in England. All the 8th Air Force, of which I was a part, was based in England. And we would fly over the Channel and then fly to France and to Germany and to Austria or wherever we had to go.
And then your your plane got shot down?
I flew, this was my 26th mission over Europe. And that particular day we were going to bomb Berlin. And well, it's another little wrinkle in the story. I wasn't flying with my original crew. We were supposed to be on a furlough in Scotland that day. And in the morning when they called the flights, they said they were short of radio operators, which I was. And so they said, hey, we need another radio operator. And it was early in the morning, they'd get you up about 1 or 2 o'clock to get ready. And so I got on a plane with a crew that I had never flown with before. I knew some of the fellows, I've seen them before, but I didn't know them personally. And we had, of course, a different pilot and a different crew, and I didn't think, these were really mixed up, this was a mixed up crew. Our crew had been together for 25 missions. We flew together as a team. On this particular day, these were people from all different crews. So the pilot was from one crew, the navigator probably, and so was the radio man. And I don't think the pilot actually didn't have as much experience as our pilot did. Our pilot had, of course, flown 25 missions already, and he was very, he knew the ropes. But it was one of these things where this guy flew into the wrong place, and the Germans had the range on us, and first they shot us apart with anti-aircraft. They knocked out the 2 engines on our airplane, and the airplane was on fire. And then when you lose altitude and you fall back, that's when you're called a straggler then, and that's when the German, what was left of the German Luftwaffe, the fighters came in and they cleaned us up. So then we had to bail out and get away from that airplane.
And then you were taken prisoner of war?
That's when I fell. I landed in the lake. I said, if you're ever going to jump out of an airplane with a parachute and you're not too sure whether you're going to land on the ground, try to find a lake somewhere. It's a nice landing. It's just like sitting in a big chair and going down and then coming back up. Only you don't, it's kind of bubbly when you come up. You don't really know when you're getting to the top, and you have a parachute floating alongside of you, which is like a huge tent hanging over your head, so you got to get out from underneath some way, otherwise you could suffocate. And I could see what was happening, because I was at a long time in coming down, and I could see the people. This was at high noon on a Sunday, and they were all down there waiting for me. And they sent out a boat with 6 or 7 people in it, and they came out and they captured me and put me in the boat. But I could speak German, and this was an advantage and a disadvantage. Of course, it was an advantage at the time because I really gave them, I said I was a salesman most of my life, but that was the best sales pitch I ever gave. Was crawling out of the water into that boat because they were not too happy to see me, really.
Did you treat you bad? Or?
Well, I knew you were going to ask that question, and I still haven't figured out how to answer it, because compared to what? I mean, some of the people, other prisoners that I've talked to were really abused. I was never abused. We suffered the same treatment that all the prisoners did because we had no food. I mean, we had a shortage of food. We didn't have any place to sleep, and we were we were the enemy. It's hard for you people to visualize that or to understand an enemy because we never had a war in our soil here. But can you imagine somebody dropping bombs in your house and then he gets out of his airplane and then you see him and what do? You say, hi, good job, come on in. That's not the way it works. We were told that if we were captured, we know what to expect. I mean, there was no surprise.
What did they feed you? What did you eat?
See, it depended a lot where you were. We were in a prison camp, in several camps, and these were organized camps where the Germans actually were in charge. And they had barracks, and they had food, a kitchen, and they had things like that set up. And it was a big encampment with a big wire enclosure around it and towers on the corners, of just like you'd see at Green Bay at the correctional institutions. And then all these wires, of course, were electrified on top. But that was a camp, and we stayed in the camp till February. And then the Russians were approaching, and the Germans were afraid that Russians might liberate us. So then they marched us after that till the end of the war for 85 days. That's that map over there. We crisscrossed the parts of Germany. We walked in between. I never really did calculate it accurately. Around 700 miles. From the 6th of February till the 2nd of May when we were liberated.
What were your feelings toward getting together?
We disliked him tremendously. That's putting it mildly. We hated his guts. That's why we were there. It wasn't like the Gulf War where they said, oh, we're not going to go after Saddam. We were going after Adolf, and that was no question. If he happened to get into sights, that would have been the end of it for him. But it was a different war altogether than the Vietnam War, the Korean War, because the people were really, everybody hated Hitler. I shouldn't say everybody. 99 and 44 100ths of the percent of the people hated Adolf Hitler because he was a bad actor. I mean, he was just bad news, that's all.
How long were you a prisoner of war?
Just about 9 months.
And then did you get to go home?
Yep. They had a camp for all the prisoners that they brought in from Europe. It was, they called it Camp Lucky Strike. It was in Le Havre, France, which is a big port. And we had a rehabilitation program there where they tried to, we lost a lot of weight because we didn't have much to eat. I think I probably was around maybe 100 pounds or 110 pounds when I was liberated. And I was about 180 otherwise, so I lost about 70 or 80 pounds. And they fed us and they tried to rebuild us and they gave us medication and everything before they put us on a boat and sent us back home.
When were you scared of diseases? Did they give you like shots or something before you went to war?
Oh yes, you get just like if you want to take a trip, outside the States, you probably have to get some. Especially if you go to certain parts of the country or certain parts of the world, you have to get shots because, like the men that went to the Gulf, they knew that there are diseases over there that we don't have over here. But we had, oh yes, we had all kinds of medication and medical treatment beforehand. So we were well prepared.
And how did you feel towards the Jews?
Living in Brillion, it's the same way like right now if there are any blacks in Brillion, the kids would accept that because we didn't know that there was any difference between Jews. I guess maybe when I went to parochial school I heard or read in the Bible or something like that there were Jews, but I wouldn't have known what made a Jew. But we did have an experience with one in our prison camp, in our barracks and in our room, who was a real bad actor, and he could have been a Gentile too as well as a Jew, I guess, but he just happened to be a Jew, and he used to snitch. When we would go to get our food and things like that, we'd take turns to go out and get the food, and when I'd tell you a little bit more about that, but he actually stole from us, and we knew he was doing it, and as a result, of course, we disliked him that much more, and there was no room for anything like that because we were all in the same boat. And we were not, it was a miserable condition to be under. So that was my only, as far as the Jews in Europe, I wouldn't have known the difference between a Jew and a Gentile.
What were the camps like?
The prison camps that we were in were, they ranged from an old garage with a ground floor to the last one we were in, which I said was a very well organized one where they had 10,000 prisoners, and they had some British there as well as most of the time. We were in camps where there were just American airmen, just enlisted men. That's the way they separated us. And this was probably one of the larger camps of 10,000 prisoners. So it was well organized, and we were there quite a while, so things were going as well as we could make them go. And the other camps were smaller, and then while we were marching, of course, that was probably the worst because we had to sleep outside and we had to sleep in barns, and there just were no facilities whatever. Sometimes we didn't we didn't have any facilities like showers or anything like that. It was in this camp that we were in, we did have a facility, but on the road we didn't have anything like that. We just slept like animals wherever you could. And I met a friend that had kept a diary of every day, and he gave me a copy, and I just put it in the book tonight, and it told about some of the things that we did. And I think back on that, and I said, I can't believe that the human body can survive under those conditions, but you can. And we have to remember that we were all in an age group maybe just a little older than you, but 18, 19 years old, most of us. And we were in good physical shape, so we could take this. And it was winter. It was February, March, and April, and they said it was one of the worst winters that they had that year. So here we are marching across Germany in the middle of winter. through the fields and through the woods and through the manure piles and everywhere else.
Were the blacks part of the war? Did they have to do anything?
Did who?
The blacks?
Oh yes, sure. We didn't have any right with us, but sure they fought. There was no discrimination, like I said. Most of them, I think what happened, the blacks were put in different, I know a lot of them were in transportation, but I know a lot of them fought in the infantry too, that is, in combat. But I don't know if there were many, I can't recall if there were any in the Air Force with us or not.
What was the age group like? Like the range from like 19?
Well, like I said, we were the youngest from 19, and we had a man on our crew. I can't figure out how he ever got into the Air Force. He was about 35 years old. And I guess in the infantry or in the other branches, he could have been older, because the Air Force was a little more restrictive, because they wanted the younger people that could make quick decisions and stuff like that, because that's what you had to do.
And when did you leave from your camp? When did you go back home?
Oh, you mean from France? It was just about a year after D-Day. It was around the 6th of June, 1945. First mission I flew was June 6, 1944, and we were liberated on May 2nd, and I think the boat left France on June 6, 1945, I think, pretty close to it.
When you first went, you took a ship over to...
Mm-hmm. We normally would have flown, because most of the crews that trained in the States had their own airplane, their own 17, and they flew them over to England. They landed in Newfoundland to refuel, but we had bad weather that time of the year in February, and as a result we had to take a boat. And that was an experience in itself, because it was a British boat. And we call them limeys. That, of course, is not a complimentary term, but it was altogether different. I came back on an American boat, and that was living, but these British, I'll tell you, they have their own way of living.
How long did it take you to get over there? How many days?
I can't remember. I think about 10 or 12 days. But of course, that was when the war was on. There were German submarines in the oceans, and we had a zigzag, and it took much longer time than coming home. We went, a straight line right from France back to New York. But they had, just to give you an idea, they had go for a lot of boiled stuff. They had boiled tomatoes, and they had boiled prunes, and they had everything. And the bread that they baked was never really baked all the way through. It was just the crust around the outside, and the inside was all dough. And the way we handled that, we'd eat the crust and make snowballs out of the dough and throw it at each other. And I can remember, it was a crowded ship, and we all slept in hammocks, and we had Pepsi-Cola. I remember that was one of the few things that we brought along, that we could carry, that was familiar to me.
Were you the only one from your family that was had to go to war?
Yeah, I guess that's right. I can't remember anybody else. Not any immediate family, anyhow. No.
I think that's it.
Let me tell you a little bit about this place that we went to see. This was after the war, of course, 1972. We were talking about some of the concentration camps. And we went to this place at Dachau, and we stopped at a restaurant before we went in there, and we were talking to some of the people, but nobody would want to admit that that place ever existed. But like I said, we prevailed on the tour guide to take us there, and we finally got inside and we walked through the place. They had a museum there of different materials that they had kept over from the actual camp. And then they had one barracks that they had saved, and you could walk through that and see how these people lived. And then, of course, they took you to the crematorium, and this is the place where it really gets to you, because there was a smell, I'd call it a stench, that just prevailed around this whole camp, and it was kind of, I don't even know how to describe it. It was just something that you know that it's bad, like it's spoiled, like spoiled meat. And then, of course, we got through the crematorium. You could see where they put the people in, and there were still some nooses hanging up on a scaffold where they hanged some of the people. And they had a memorial there, a stone outside this crematorium, and there were, every day somebody put a bouquet of flowers. They never knew who it came from, but there was always a bouquet of flowers. And I remember the saying on the marker. It said, Oh, gee, I wish I could remember it exactly, but you've heard it since then. It's been used a lot because it's something to the effect that let those of us that have been through it learn never to do the same thing again.
Mm-hmm. I think that's it. Thank you.
So, well, you did one thing. I've been thinking about this now for 50 years of putting all this together in some type of a book or something that I can give it to my grandchildren, or if somebody else wants to look at it, they can. And I actually started it after you called.
Oh, great.
So you were the stimulus to do this. But it's kind of interesting. You think of it, it's almost 50 years. It'll be 50 years, in 1950 or 1994 that all this took place. But to give you an idea, we when we would go on these bombing raids, we would be gone like 8 hours. We would leave and we'd always get up real early, like I said, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We had briefings and we had all the breakfast and all this other stuff to do. And by the time we got into our airplane and everything, it was just dawn. That was the idea, to get up, to be in the air by the time the sun rose. And of course in England, the sun very seldom shines in England. It's a real dreary country, beautiful country, but dreary. So we always got to see the sun. Once you get up above the clouds, of course, it's always pretty. And it was just beautiful some mornings to see that. But you knew that when you were on your way, you may not come back, because it was just like any war. When you go into war, the enemy is out to get you, you're out to get him, and whoever shoots first and straight, he gets to come home.
Did you get to send letters home?
Yeah, I found something today about letters that I sent out from prison camp. We were allowed to send 2 letters, 1 letter a month. And I was able to send out letters, and my sister and folks got those, and but I never got any mail from home. You had to be a prisoner like a year before you got any letters.
Wow.
And of course, being on the move like this all the time, they never knew where you were.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one letter in here that was sent to me by my sister, was sent to England, was sent to Germany, then was sent back to England and sent back to the United States. I never got to see it until I got home.
Oh.
And packages too, they would send, this is not to me in prison camp, but they sent to me in England, and then for some reason or other they weren't able to be delivered, so then they send them back to the United States, and there were cookies in there, and he said they had fur on them about 1/4 inch thick. That's how long it was in process. So, did I tell you what you wanted to know, or is there something else that
Oh, I think you covered it all. It's very interesting.
I don't know if I saw any other questions you had in there that, about how I felt about the war.
Yeah.
I guess because everybody, I can remember coming home on a furlough. That's before I went overseas, and I thought, now this sure is dumb. There was nobody at home. And brilliant. I mean, most of the guys my age were in the service.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, gee, I just soon go back and be with the guys that I'm. So, I guess I've talked to people that were deferred for some reason or other. They were farm boys or something like that, and I thought, boy, they don't know what they missed. Really, not by going into combat, but what you missed by going into military service, because it did have some benefits.
When you first went to over to Germany, was the massacre of the Jews first beginning, or was it like?
I can't really recall ever hearing too much about it. It probably was in the newspapers over there too. We had a military newspaper, and it might have been in there because we knew that there were a lot of bad things happening over there.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there were some prisoners that were captured and that escaped and came back, and they told some of the things that happened over there. Not to, what should I say, belittle our experience. I've got friends that were prisoners over in the Pacific or in Japan and in China, and those stories that they tell are something else. How those people survived is just plain miraculous. There was a story in the Appleton paper just a week ago or so ago, a friend of mine that he was actually on a ship, a Japanese ship. They were transferring him from one place to another, and the American submarine blew it up. And this guy floated on a piece of lumber for a couple days, and finally another group, they had a life raft, and they all got on a life raft, and then they struggled with this thing for some more days, and then they finally got to a shore, and then they were recaptured by the Japanese. So these are some of the stories, and they were really abused and tortured over there.
While you were in the war, did you ever see any of the camps that the Jews were in?
No.
No?
No, the closest we got to that was an international camp where they had a lot of prisoners that, or you might say like guerrillas or something like that probably were not with any established army. And this was very, very pathetic. We were only there a day or two, but these people, you would see them go through the garbage, and they had like one faucet of water for like say 500 people. And they had to go and get whatever they had to drink or to wash with out of that. They'd get there 30 seconds or however long they were at the spigot.
Oh.
And these people, they were just like animals. They were unshaven, of course, and they smelled to high heaven because they didn't have any access to anything to clean up with. But those were political prisoners of a sort, not like the Jews. The Jews were treated altogether different.
Mm-hmm.
That was Hitler's great idea, to cleanse the race, to come up with the superhuman Aryan race. That was one of the things. I was blonde, of course, and I was German. I could speak German, so I was in pretty good shape. I didn't get nearly the rough treatment that some of the other guys did. They thought I was a spy. That's what I was accused of being.
Yeah.
So I was put in solitary confinement and kept in there for a while, and after a while they let me go.
Wow.
Didn't do anything.
Were you really scared? I mean,
Oh, sure you're scared. You're scared all the time. I know. I was just telling my grandson the other day when we were flying, we had a radio room in our airplane, and I would always sit there, and I don't know why, I flew with my feet just above the floor like this. It was one of these freak things. But when you're flying along and all of a sudden you see big puffs of this black anti-aircraft smoke out there, you know there was a shell in there and that there are pieces flying around. And we came back a lot of times with holes in our airplane. And there was a lot of banging going on when this stuff hits you, but we never had any injuries or any fatalities as long as we flew those 25 missions. But on this mission, where I was shot down, I think they killed our pilot, our co-pilot, our bombardier, our navigator, and probably our engineer, because they were all in the front of the airplane, and we never heard from them again. The rest of us were all toward the rear.
how many is there on a...
There were 9 in our airplane. They started out with 10 in each crew, and then they started to run short of personnel, so then we only had 9. But our airplane was on fire, and we had to, the door that we were going to use, the hinges had melted shut, so we couldn't use that one, so we had to find another door. And you have to remember, we're flying, I didn't tell you this, but we're flying at 33,000 feet, which is like 5 miles, 6 miles, and you're on oxygen. And then, of course, when this airplane is on fire, you got to get off of that or you blow up, you know. So we were without oxygen for quite a while, and we were starting to black out. And when I jumped out, actually, I blacked out because I pulled the ripcord right away because I was afraid I wouldn't be conscious enough to do it otherwise.
Yeah.
Because we were taught in training to delay it as long as possible. But you felt like, I always said, you felt like a vertical windmill or a horizontal windmill. You feel like your head was in the middle and your feet were flying around. So you knew, you had the sensation like you were blacking out.
I think that's it.
Okay. Actually, I was shot down in Berlin, which probably is around here somewhere, and then I was taken down this way. There was a trenchant camp where they brought all prisoners of war. This is where you were processed and where they took your name and got everything else. And then I was taken, there were some other little camps along the way, but eventually I was taken all the way up here. This is where our final camp was, way up on the Baltic Sea near Poland. And that was our permanent camp, the one that I was telling you about. And then, of course, our march was along the Baltic Sea, all the way along here. And we'd go over and then come back a little bit. We were finally liberated near Hamburg. But that was where we marched through the, like I said, through the farm fields and through the mud holes and manure piles and barns and everything else. And but there was one thing about the march: we were able to steal a lot of food, and that, of course, helped us a great deal because we didn't have that chance when we were in a prison camp. But we did have a very. This is probably one of the most memorable parts of the whole prison life. We were in a railroad car, and they wouldn't let us out of there for 5 days.
To give you food?
Well, they gave us a loaf of black bread before we started out, and I've forgotten what else it was. It wasn't very much, though. But the toilet facilities were pretty sad. If you can, this is kind of brutal, but all you had was just a pail. They'd put in a pail, and there were 22 of us in a room. A railroad car is probably about 8 feet wide, about like this, and maybe about up to that Davenport there. And there were 22 of us in there. We couldn't all sit down at one time. We had to stand. And then, of course, we were subjected to air raids. Our own bombers came over, and the Germans would go into air raid shelters, and we just had to sit there and wait. And if the bombs would have fallen on us, that would have been it. But fortunately, it wasn't. So when our bombers flew away, the Germans would come out, and then they'd start up the train again, and then away we go. But 5 days and 5 nights it was on that train. That was a bad experience, but we survived. And that's, I guess, what the whole thing boiled down to, was just a matter of survival. And that was a combination of believing in God and trusting in your own faith and in your ability, and just a hope that you could get back home again. That's what.
Did you get to carry like a Bible with you, or?
Yes, most of us had Bibles, but the Germans were a little bit funny about that. They took a lot of them away too. They did some, like I said, some cruel things. Like I remember when among the people that I was interrogated with, the man was married and he had a wedding ring. And he was married quite a few years, and as a result, the wedding ring didn't come off very easily. But they pulled it off. They tore off half of his finger in the process, but they got it off. They would take a lot of, Catholics wore a lot of crucifixes around their neck. They would take those away from them. They were kind of anti-religious, that group. It depended on who you got, what kind of guards you got. If you got, the SS was bad. That was their real mean, like the Gestapo. They were very mean. And then, of course, a little later in the war, by the time we were in this camp, they had a lot of old men and soldiers that were wounded that couldn't fight anymore. And those were our guards. So that actually when the war was over, when we were liberated, the war wasn't over yet, but we were liberated a few days before the war. We were all standing around a big manure pile, wondering what we were going to do that day. And a British armored car came by, and he saw us, and he jumped out and ran over, and right away the Germans knew what was coming, because we had been marching between the lines for the last couple of nights. And the guy was in charge threw up his hands and threw his gun down, and all the guards threw their guns on the manure pile. And then, of course, the guy that had the armored car, he had a few provisions in there, and then he threw out all the food that he had. So we all jumped on that right away, and actually, we hugged the guys that were our guards, because we had been with them so long. They protected us from the civilians, and the civilians were more dangerous than the soldiers. So actually, we got to know each other pretty good. And we were just glad to see the war was over.
Were the German soldiers like young boys?
No, these were older people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, these were the ones. They had the real young ones they were mean too. I know when we'd march sometimes in a railroad station or into a city, they'd throw stuff at it.
Because I read that Hitler put everybody in the war, all the children and everybody.
The people that captured me were just civilians, but they all had guns, and they all had authority to, if they caught you, they probably had the right to shoot you if they wanted to. So it was just a matter of whether if they had any mercy on you or not. And like I said, geez, when you come in at 12 o'clock noon on Sunday and try to but bomb out somebody's house, you're not too friendly or not too happy to see them. But they were really spooky about me being a spy. That was a concern of theirs. And they asked me where I came from and what I was doing in the Army. I told them Franklin Roosevelt sent me. They didn't know whether they should believe that or not, I guess. This dysentery, and then there were all the diseases like typhus and all these, not so much typhus, but diseases of the lungs like bronchitis and pneumonia and things like that. And if any of the people got sick, we had to put them on a wagon. We always pulled a wagon with us, like a big farm wagon, and it was pulled by people. And all the sick were on there, and then we would try to find places as we went along to go to a doctor or something. And if these people were so sick they couldn't go any further, then the Germans would take a 45 pistol. But when I was in gunnery school, I never did real well with that. So I thought, I'm not even going to tempt them with that. So on the way down, I threw it away. We had it in a holster. And that was another thing where when they captured me, they said, "Where's your gun?" I said, "I don't have one." Every American Luftgangster has a gun. So that was another thing between being a spy and not being able to find my gun. They weren't too, they stayed their distance from me. They watched me for quite a while.
Lucky.
3.5 years.
Some of these guys over in the Pacific, they were prisoners over there for 5 years.
Wow.
Well, that's like in Vietnam. Some of these guys were there 7, 8 years as prisoners in these bamboo cages. But first of all, where we came from, where our base was, they wanted to know where we were going, what our target was, and they wanted to know a lot of different things. And our instructions, of course, were the only thing we could give them was name, rank, and serial number. That's all that you have to give them. And of course, then they tried other different approaches. And I can remember when we were training, they told us, they said some of the things you can expect, that they're going to give you a nice young woman, they're going to give you cigarettes, and they're going to give you wine, and they're going to give you all that stuff. And that's one approach. And then they go to the opposite of that, and then they'll start torturing you. They'll put you on a rack or something like that, or pull your fingernails out, or something like, anything to make you talk. And this guy wasn't really high pressure at all. He worked on me for a little while, like I was at it for 3 days, but some of the guys were there for long periods. But he told me, he said, "Look, you don't want to tell me, do you?" He said, "I'll tell you then." And he told me exactly where we came from, where we were, what target we were bombing. He told me about my relatives in the United States. And I was just flabbergasted. And he knew I was flabbergasted because I could tell in his face, because they had the files. Their intelligence was so good over there that he told me after all, he said, "We had a man in your briefing room this morning. That's why we know who you are and where you came from and where you were going." So there wasn't anything that he didn't know. He just wanted to verify it, I suppose, and see if he could find out something new. And flying a bomber the way we did it, we had a target. Say we were going to go to an airport and knock out an airport. And we would get to a certain place, and then the bombardier would take over. The plane couldn't go anywhere. It had to go right straight to that target because the bombardier had the bomb sight, and he was flying the plane. And you knew right over that target is where the flak was the heaviest and where the fighters would be. And you had no alternative. You had to go through it. And that is, of course, where they kill you. Either shoot you down or kill you right in the air.
Did you ever have to take prisoners, like from Germany? Did you ever take
No.
prisoners? No.
We had another weird thing happen when we got back into France, into this camp. They had Germans and Italian prisoners of war serving the food. And here we are starved, we hadn't eaten real good for a long time. And they wouldn't let us eat a lot either because your stomach takes a little while to recover. You don't just load it up. We all did get sick right away, but we just couldn't understand why these Germans would withhold food from us. And we used to get pretty ugly in the lines, It caused kind of a small riot once in a while, but we found out after a while, well, that's the only way to do it. And they had the help, so that's what they used them for.
From World War II, like now?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We have this prisoner of war group. That's a separate, just all prisoners, guys that were prisoners of war. But then we have, like the Legion, you have a lot of guys, you know, that you know. And then you keep contact with certain friends. Coincidence, about 2 months ago, oh, first of all, when I was shot down, the day that I was shot down, that was the last time I saw my original crew in England. That was or August 6, 1944. In August of 1945, we were given a furlough to Miami Beach, Florida. The prisoners of war had 60 days or something like that. So I went down there with the rest of the guys, and I ran into my original crew, the ones that completed their whole series of missions that I flew with originally. They completed their whole series of missions and then went home. And I met them down in Florida, and we talked a little bit and stuff like that. Didn't get a chance to see them too long. But then I hadn't seen any of those people or talked to any of them since 1945. And the other day, I had a phone call from my co-pilot down in Illinois.
Oh, wow.
And he said, I was just moving, he said, and we're moving to a new place. And he said, I had a whole bunch of records and stuff, and I saw your telephone number. He was in Milwaukee when he was flying. So he and I were both from Wisconsin, so we kind of knew each other. And so he called me and told me where he was living now and invited us to come down and see him. But
Wow.
I hadn't heard from any of my crew members since 1945.
That's really neat.
I have one real close friend who was as a prisoner of war. You worked in groups of 3 when we were on the march. And I had one friend in Indiana and another friend in Nevada. And I keep real close contact with the guy in Nevada. Unfortunately, he has Parkinson's disease, so he can't do whatever he likes to do. But we always hope that sometime we can get together again. But we exchange information, and it's a camaraderie that you build for, you know, having been through something like that with somebody else that nobody else can understand.
That's really
So
neat.
it's very nice.